The air in the bank was cold, a manufactured chill designed to feel expensive, to feel important. It was a kind of cold that seeped into old bones and settled there, a quiet, unwelcome guest. To Arthur, it felt familiar, like the biting pre-dawn air of 100 forgotten places on the other side of the world. He sat perfectly still in the plush leather chair, his back straight, his gnarled hands resting one over the other on his knee. He was a statue of patience carved from weathered oak, a forgotten monument in a temple of polished marble and hushed transactions. Across the vast mahogany desk, a young man named Chad adjusted his silk tie. His lips curled into a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was a smile of professional condescension, a tool he sharpened daily. "Sir," Chad said, his voice a smooth, syrupy blade. "As I've explained to your son, our wealth management services are tailored for a certain caliber of client. Our portfolio minimums are quite substantial." He didn't look at Arthur when he spoke, directing his words instead to the younger man fidgeting beside the old one, a man whose face was a canvas of raw shame and simmering frustration. This was Leo, Arthur's son, a son who hadn't spoken to him in 7 years, not since his mother's funeral. A son who had appeared on his doorstep 2 days ago, his eyes averted, his voice tight, asking for a favor that tasted like ash in both their mouths. To Leo, the man beside him was a ghost, a living embodiment of a life unlived, a potential squandered. To Chad, the lone manager, he was just another piece of worn-out furniture cluttering his pristine office, an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be dismissed. To them, he was just an old man in a threadbare coat, a relic of a bygone era. They couldn't possibly comprehend. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see behind the quiet eyes and the gentle tremor in his hand, was that this old man had walked through fire and shadow. They couldn't know that the faint, faded ink on his forearm, a barely visible swirl of a serpent eating its own tail, was a sigil of legend whispered only in the most secret corridors of power. They were about to learn a lesson in honor, a lesson written in scars and sacrifice, a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their days. Welcome to our channel, where we believe the deepest stories of heroism are often hidden in the quietest hearts. If you are moved by the power of silent strength and the triumph of character over circumstance, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our community for more stories that matter. The moment Leo had appeared at his door, Arthur had felt the subtle shift in the universe, the disturbance of a long settled peace. The years had peeled away, and he was once again standing in the quiet aftermath of a storm, the air thick with unspoken things. Leo stood on the worn welcome mat, a stranger wearing his son's face. He was taller, his shoulders broadened by the cut of an expensive suit, but his eyes were the same, a restless, turbulent blue that mirrored his mother's. They darted around the small, immaculately clean apartment, taking the faded floral wallpaper, the worn armchair where Arthur spent his evenings, the scent of lemon polish and old paper. It was a judgment, silent and swift. In his son's eyes, Arthur saw not just the 7 years of silence, but a lifetime of perceived disappointment. The conversation that followed was a stilted, painful dance around the gaping crater that had opened between them. Leo spoke of his job in finance, of market trends and quarterly reports, words that felt alien in the quiet simplicity of Arthur's home. He spoke of a life built on frantic, relentless acquisition, a world so different from Arthur's, which was now defined by quiet subtraction, by the slow letting go of things and people he had loved. And then it came, the reason for this sudden, jarring reunion. "I need a co-signer," Leo had said, the words rushing out as if he were afraid they would choke him. A car, a luxury sedan with a price tag that exceeded the entire value of Arthur's modest pension. It was a key, Leo explained, a key to a new level of his career, a symbol he needed to project to his clients, to his girlfriend, to the world. He needed his father's name on a piece of paper, a father whose life he had openly disdained, whose quiet existence was a source of deep, unspoken shame for him. Arthur had simply listened, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak of the years of birthdays missed, of holidays spent in silence. He didn't speak of the gnawing ache of a father's love being met with son's impenetrable wall. He just nodded slowly. "I see," was all he said. And now, sitting in this cold, sterile bank, he saw it all with a terrible, piercing clarity. He saw the chasm between his world and his son's, a divide not of years, but of values. He saw the desperation in Leo's posture, the way he leaned forward as if pleading with Chad, the lone manager, with his entire body. And he saw the contempt in Chad's face, a casual cruelty that dismissed a lifetime in a single glance. He was invisible. He was nothing. And in his son's mortified silence, Arthur knew that Leo wished he were anywhere else, with anyone else. The weight of it all settled on his shoulders, heavier than any rucksack he had ever carried. The quiet of Arthur's life was a carefully constructed fortress, built brick by brick over decades of profound and deafening noise. His mornings began before the sun, in the blue-gray stillness of the dawn. The first act was always the coffee, a dark, bitter brew he drank black from a thick ceramic mug. The ritual was an anchor, a small, solid thing in the vast, churning ocean of memory. His apartment was a museum of a life, but not his own. It was his wife's. Eleanor's presence was in the delicate porcelain teacups that sat and used in the glass-fronted cabinet. It was in the pressed flowers tucked between the pages of the poetry books on the shelf. Their colors faded to gentle ghosts. It was in the faint, lingering scent of lavender that seemed to rise from the wooden floors on warm afternoons. He had kept it all just as she had left it, a shrine to a love that had been the one true north of his life. His own history was relegated to a single, locked metal box in the bottom of his wardrobe. Inside there was no glory, just a handful of tarnished medals, a folded flag, crisp and heavy, and a few faded photographs of young men with old eyes, their arms slung around each other in some dusty, sun-bleached Hell's Cape a world away. He never opened the box. He didn't need to. The contents were seared onto the inside of his eyelids. His days followed a simple, predictable rhythm. A slow walk to the park, his left leg dragging ever so slightly, a souvenir from a lifetime ago. The limp was a quiet drumbeat, a constant reminder. Sometimes, children would stare, and their parents would pull them away with hurried apologies. Arthur would just offer a small, sad smile. He would sit on a particular bench overlooking the duck pond, the same bench where he and Eleanor had shared countless afternoons. He didn't come to remember her. He came to be with her. In the afternoons, he volunteered at the local library, mending the spines of broken books. There was a deep satisfaction in it, in taking something torn and making it whole again. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, would often try to draw him into conversation, to chip away at his quiet reserve. "You're so good with your hands, Arthur," she would say. "You must have been a craftsman." He would just nod. Something like that. He lived a life of deliberate anonymity, a man trying to fade into the background. He was a quiet neighbor who always returned his shopping cart, the old man at the bus stop who gave up his seat without a word. He asked for nothing and expected even less. Yet, the past was a stubborn phantom. It lived in his body, in the web of silvery scars across his back, in the way he would instinctively scan a room upon entering, mapping the exits, assessing the threats. And it lived on his skin. On the weathered flesh of his right forearm was a tattoo, its lines blurred by time and sun. It was a serpent, coiled into a circle, devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros. To most, it was just a strange, faded drawing. But to a select, invisible few, it was a crest. It was the mark of Task Force Nomad, a unit so clandestine that its operational history was a ghost story, a myth whispered in the intelligence community. It was the emblem of a brotherhood forged in the crucible of impossible missions, a family of men who had been to the edge of human endurance and back. Arthur never looked at the tattoo. He never had to. He could feel its weight, the phantom itch of the needle, the silent oath it represented. It was a part of him, a brand that marked him as one of the chosen, one of the damned. He was a lion in winter, his roar long since silenced, his claws retracted. He was content to be seen as a lamb. It was safer that way, for everyone. Leo's world was a frantic, glittering illusion, held together by sheer force of will. He lived in a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city that felt, most days, like it was trying to swallow him whole. His job was a pressure cooker, a place where weakness was a scent that attracted predators. He was good at his job, but he was always running, always chasing the next commission, the next deal, the next rung on a ladder that seemed to extend infinitely into the clouds. His father, Arthur, was a relic from a past he had worked tirelessly to escape. After his mother died, the quiet, stoic grief of his father had become an unbearable weight. It felt to Leo like an accusation. Why wasn't he doing more? Why wasn't he more successful? Why did he seem so content with nothing? Leo, in his youthful arrogance, had mistaken his father's humility for apathy, his silence for weakness. He saw the small apartment, the worn clothes, the lack of material ambition, and he felt a hot, crawling shame. This man, this quiet, unassuming man, could not possibly be the father of the person he was trying to become. So he had built a wall of silence, of distance, of unanswered phone calls and returned letters. It was a cruel thing, and a small part of him, a part he kept locked away, knew it. But the wall was necessary to protect the fragile identity he was constructing for himself. His girlfriend, Chloe, was part of that construction. She was beautiful, ambitious, and came from a family whose name was synonymous with old money. She loved the version of Leo he presented to the world, the sharp-suited, fast-talking financial wizard who was going places. She didn't know about the crushing debt he carried or the deep-seated insecurity that gnawed at him in the dead of night. She didn't know about the quiet old man in the threadbare coat. The car was the final piece of the puzzle. It was a sleek, black European sedan, the kind of car that announced your arrival before you even stepped out of it. It was the key, he told himself, the thing that would solidify his image. That would make Chloe's parents finally see him as an equal. That would make his clients trust him implicitly. But the bank had said no. His credit was stretched too thin, his debt-to-income ratio too high. He needed a co-signer, a person of substance. His mind had raced through the possibilities. His friends were all in the same boat, swimming in debt. His colleagues were competitors, not allies. And Chloe's family? Asking them was out of question. It would shatter the illusion completely. And so his mind had landed, with a sickening thud, on the one person he had spent nearly a decade trying to forget. The drive to his father's apartment had been an exercise in self-loathing. Every familiar street, every landmark from his childhood, felt like a judgment. When Arthur opened the door, looking older, smaller than Leo remembered, the carefully constructed walls around Leo's heart began to crack. He had stumbled through the explanation, the words tasting like poison. He watched his father's face, searching for a flicker of anger, of resentment, of, "I told you so." He saw nothing, just a deep, profound stillness, a quiet acceptance that was, in its own way, even more damning. Arthur didn't lecture. He didn't demand an apology for the years of silence. He simply listened, his gaze steady, and then gave that slow, deliberate nod. "I see." The words were not an absolution, but a statement of fact. And in that moment, Leo felt a sliver of something he hadn't felt in years. He felt small. He felt like a child who had broken something beautiful and didn't know how to fix it. But the feeling was quickly swallowed by the frantic, clawing need that had brought him there. He needed that signature. He needed that car. He pushed the feeling down, reinforcing the walls, telling himself it was just business. It was just a means to an end. He would get what he needed, and then he could retreat back into his carefully curated life, leaving the ghost of his father behind once more. The ride to the bank was a symphony of suffocating silence. Arthur sat in the passenger seat of the loaner car Leo had been given for the test drive, the scent of new leather and synthetic air freshener feeling alien and intrusive. He looked out the window, watching the city blur past, a river of steel and glass that held no meaning for him. He could feel Leo's tension radiating from the driver's seat. His son's hands were clenched on the steering wheel, his jaw tight. It was the posture of a man bracing for impact. Arthur knew this posture well. He had seen it on young soldiers before a mission, the desperate attempt to project a calm that felt a million miles away. The bank was an imposing cathedral of modern capitalism. Its soaring glass atrium and minimalist decor were designed to intimidate, to make one feel small and insignificant before the great altar of commerce. As they walked through the automatic glass doors, a wave of cold, conditioned air washed over them. Men and women in sharp, dark suits moved with brisk, predatory grace, their voices low and urgent. It was a world humming with a frequency Arthur did not recognize. A young woman at the reception desk, her name tag reading Sarah, offered them a polite, genuine smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes kind. Leo, stepping in front of his father as if to shield her from the sight of him, announced, "We have an appointment with Mr. Collins." "Of course," Sarah said, her smile not faltering as she glanced at Arthur. "Would you like a water, sir, while you wait?" Arthur was taken aback by the simple act of kindness. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. Sarah noticed the way he took the cup with a quiet dignity, the way his eyes met hers with a flicker of gratitude. There was a stillness about him, a weight, that seemed out of place in this frantic environment. She saw him not as an old man, but as a man who had seen things. She couldn't have explained it, but she felt it. Chad's office was at the back, a glass wall box that looked out over the main floor. He was on the phone when they were shown in, and he motioned for them to sit, holding up a finger to indicate he would be just a moment. The gesture was one of dismissal, of power. He was making them wait. He was establishing the hierarchy. When he finally hung up the phone, he swiveled in his high-backed leather chair and fixed him with his practiced, empty smile. "Leo," he said, his tone overly familiar, "good to see you again, and this must be your father." He glanced at Arthur, his eyes taking the warm but clean tweed jacket, the simple, inexpensive shoes, the lines etched on his face by time and hardship. The appraisal was instant, and the verdict was clear. This man was of no consequence. "All right," Chad said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's have a look at the paperwork. We'll need your father's financial statements, of course. Tax returns for the last 3 years, proof of income, list of assets, pension details, the whole 9 yards. He said it with a breezy confidence, but the underlying message was clear. This was a test, and he fully expected Arthur to fail. Leo shifted uncomfortably, a flush creeping up his neck. "My father is retired," he mumbled, pushing a thin folder across the desk. Chad opened it with a theatrical flourish. He scanned the first page, a summary of Arthur's meager military pension and Social Security benefits. His eyebrow arched. The condescending smile on his lips widened into a smirk. He was enjoying this. He was a predator who had scented blood, and he was ready to play with his food. The slow, deliberate humiliation was about to begin. The performance began subtly. Chad tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the single sheet of paper that detailed Arthur's financial world. "Okay," he sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "This is what we have to work with." He looked up at Leo, completely ignoring Arthur, as if the old man were a piece of furniture. "Leo, I'm going to be frank with you, because I like you. This is not what the underwriters are looking for in a co-signer." The words were chosen to create a bond with Leo, to frame it as U.S. against the problem of M. Arthur remained silent, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. He had been in interrogation rooms that felt warmer than this office. He had faced down men with guns and knives who showed more respect. This was a different kind of violence, a slow, methodical stripping away of dignity. Chad leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The monthly income here, it's less than the monthly payment on the car you're looking at. The assets are negligible." He said the word negligible with a certain relish, drawing it out, letting it hang in the air like a foul odor. Leo's face was a mask of crimson. The shame was a physical thing, a hot liquid filling his lungs. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to swallow him. And in a dark, twisted corner of his heart, he was furious. He was furious at his father for being this person, for having this life, for making him endure this. He leaned over, his voice a harsh, desperate whisper meant only for Arthur. "I knew this was a mistake. Why couldn't you have just done something with your life? Why did you have to be this?" Arthur's gaze shifted from the wall to his son's face. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his features. It was not anger. It was a deep, bottomless sorrow, a pain that went beyond the sterile insults of a bank clerk. This was the wound that mattered. From her desk on the main floor, Sarah, the young teller, could see into Chad's glass office. She saw the arrogant posture of her boss and the defeated slump of the younger client. But her attention was drawn to the old man. He sat with an unwavering stillness, a rock in a churning sea. She had seen Chad eviscerate clients before, people with far more resources than this man likely had. She'd seen them bluster, argue, or break down. The old man did none of these. He just sat, absorbing the blows with a silent fortitude that she found both heartbreaking and deeply compelling. As Chad continued his condescending monologue, Arthur rested his hand on the arm of the chair. The sleeve of his jacket rolled up just an inch, revealing the faded ink on his forearm. Sarah's eyes, keen and curious, caught the image. A snake eating its own tail. It was strange, mythic. It seemed to hold a meaning that was utterly at odds with the scene of quiet humiliation playing out before her. Chad, meanwhile, was escalating. He picked up the phone. "Susan," he said, his voice now loud enough for those outside the office to hear. "I'm going to need you to run a full credit and background check on an Arthur Jensen. JNSN. Yeah, that's him. Let me know what you find. I suspect it won't take long." He hung up and gave Leo a look of theatrical pity. "Just a formality. We have to do our due diligence. You understand? Protect the bank's interests." The message was clear. Your father is a risk. He is a liability. The tension in the room was now a physical presence. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first volley, the air thick with the promise of more destruction to come. Arthur closed his eyes. Just for a second, he was not in a bank in the middle of a bustling city. He was somewhere else entirely. A place of dust and sun, a place where honor was not measured in dollars and cents, but in the blood and sweat of brothers. The moment stretched, thin and taut, ready to snap. Chad was leaning forward, a predator about to deliver the final, killing blow. "Look, gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Perhaps it's best if we just call it a day. Clearly, this isn't a viable path forward. We can't approve a loan of this magnitude based on goodwill." He was about to suggest that securities show them out. The air crackled with the unspoken insult. It was in that precise instant that the universe shifted on its axis. The main glass doors of the bank slid open with a soft, expensive whoosh. All motion on the banking floor seemed to slow, then cease altogether. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned as one, drawn by an invisible force, a sudden change in the atmospheric pressure. A man stood framed in the entrance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, in his late 60s, but carried himself with the rigid, electrifying posture of a man half his age. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that whispered of immense wealth, but it was the way he occupied the space that commanded attention. It was not arrogance. It was an innate, unshakable authority. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was a roadmap of intense, lived experience. This was Alastair Sterling, the founder and chairman of the entire banking corporation. He was a legend, a recluse, a phantom who was rumored to visit his flagship branches unannounced perhaps once a decade. His presence was like a lightning strike on a clear day. Chad, who had been mid-smirk, froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy mask of sheer terror. He shot to his feet, knocking a stack of papers to the floor. "Mr. Sterling!" he squeaked, his voice cracking like a terrified adolescent's. The entire staff was now on its feet, a silent, petrified army awaiting orders. Sterling's eyes, the color of chips of ice, swept the room. They were eyes that had seen everything, that missed nothing. They swept past the fawning managers, past the terrified tellers, past the frozen customers. And then they stopped. They locked onto the back of the old man in the threadbare coat, sitting in Chad's office. The icy expression on Sterling's face melted away, replaced by something that no one in that bank had ever seen. It was a look of profound, absolute, and undiluted reverence. He took a step, and then another, his expensive shoes making no sound on the polished marble. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying in its intensity. He was a heat-seeking missile, and his target was clear. He walked directly toward Chad's office, his gaze never leaving the quiet, still figure of Arthur Jensen. He ignored the stammering, bowing employees who scrambled to get out of his way. He ignored Leo, whose mouth hung open in stunned disbelief. He walked as if he and Arthur were the only two people in the world. He stopped at the door of the glass office, his presence filling the space, sucking all the air out of it. Chad looked as if he was about to have a coronary. "Yes, sir," he stammered. "Welcome. I was just concluding a meeting with a client." Sterling didn't even glance at him. He looked past him, through him, his entire being focused on the old man who was now slowly turning his head to meet his gaze. A flicker of recognition passed between them, a silent communication that spanned decades and crossed oceans of experience. The air was thick with history. A story was about to be told. Alistair Sterling stood in the doorway, a titan of finance and industry, and yet he held himself with the deference of a junior officer addressing a superior. He looked at Arthur, and the silence in the room became heavy, sacred. Chad, desperate to regain control, took a half-step forward. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I can assure you, this is just a minor administrative matter. These gentlemen were just on their way out. The applicant, unfortunately, did not meet the necessary fiscal requirements for a cosigner, and—" Sterling silenced him without a word. He simply turned his head an inch, and the cold fire in his eyes was enough to make Chad physically recoil, his words dying in his throat. The chairman's attention returned to Arthur. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the building. It was a voice accustomed to giving commands that shaped nations, but now it was laced with something else entirely. A deep, profound emotion. "Arthur," he said, the name spoken like a prayer. "Sergeant Major Jensen." Leo's head snapped up. Sergeant Major? His father? The man who fixed broken books and lived on a pittance? It didn't make sense. Sterling took a step into the office. He looked at Arthur's simple clothes, his worn shoes, the quiet dignity in his posture, and a flicker of a smile touched his lips, a smile of deep understanding. "Still refusing to wear the uniform, I see," he said, a private remark in a very public space. "Some things never change." He then turned his gaze upon the stunned occupants of the room, letting it rest for a long, uncomfortable moment on Chad, and then on the pale, confused face of Leo. His voice rose, taking on a tone of command, of proclamation. "You!" he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a sword. "You sit here in your glass box and you judge this man. You measure him in dollars and cents. You look at his coat and you see a beggar. You see weakness." He took another step closer, his shadow falling across the mahogany desk. "You have no idea, do you? You have no idea whose presence you are in." He looked directly at Leo. "You are his son, and you have no idea." Sterling's gaze went back to Arthur. "I haven't seen you in person since the aftermath in the Al-Qadr Valley, since you pulled my men out of that burning Chinook one by one, while the sky was falling around you." The room was utterly still. Even the traffic outside seemed to have ceased. Sarah, the teller, stood frozen by her desk, her hand over her mouth. "This bank," Sterling continued, his voice ringing with righteous fury, "is built on a foundation of calculated risk. We have algorithms and charts to predict the future. But there are some things you cannot quantify. You cannot quantify honor. You cannot quantify courage. You cannot quantify the character of a man who will walk into hell to carry his brothers home." He pointed a finger, not at Arthur, but at the file on Chad's desk. "You see that pension? That meager sum? That is what this country pays a man who holds the Distinguished Service Cross. It's what they pay a man who was awarded 3 silver stars for gallantry, 4 bronze stars for valor, and 5 purple hearts for shedding his blood on forgotten battlefields, so that men like you could have the freedom to sit in your comfortable chairs and insult him." The words landed like hammer blows. Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Stars. The names of the medals were like thunderclaps in the silent room, mythic and impossible. Leo felt the floor drop out from beneath him. His father, his quiet, simple failure of a father. The image in his head was shattering, replaced by a figure of impossible, terrifying heroism. He looked at Arthur, truly looked at him for the first time in his life, and saw not the old man, but the sergeant major. The air in the office was thick with the ghosts of forgotten battles. Alistair Sterling was no longer just a bank chairman. He was a witness, a high priest officiating at the altar of memory. His voice, a resonant baritone, held the entire building captive. He turned his steely gaze back to Chad, who now looked like a small, terrified boy. "You were concerned about his assets," Sterling said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let me tell you about his assets." He took a step closer to Arthur, and with a gentle movement, he reached down and pointed his friend's left leg. "You see this limp? This man has a slight limp. An inconvenience, you might think. This inconvenience was earned carrying a wounded private, a boy no older than you, for 3 kilometers through enemy-infested jungle after their patrol was ambushed. He carried that boy on his back, under constant fire, until they reached the extraction zone. The boy lived. Arthur was shot twice in that leg for his trouble. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor. He turned it down. When a debriefing officer asked him why, he said only 3 words. He was heavy. Sterling let that sink in. The simplicity of the statement, the profound humility it contained, was more powerful than any boast. Leo felt a sob rise in his throat, a sound of such profound, gut-wrenching shame that it physically hurt. He thought of all the times he had been embarrassed by his father's limp, of all the times he had wished his father were more normal. The weight of his own ignorance was crushing him. Sterling then gestured to Arthur's right forearm, where a faded tattoo was just visible beyond the cuff of his sleeve. "And this," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a tone of reverence. "This tattoo, I see the young lady at the counter noticed it." He gave a slight nod to Sarah, who blushed, tears welling in her eyes. "Most people wouldn't. It's not meant for them. That is the insignia of Task Force Nomad." A ripple of shock went through the few in the room, who understood the implications. Chad and Leo were clueless, but a security guard near the door, an ex-Marine, audibly gasped. His back went ramrod straight. "The government has spent 50 years denying that unit ever existed," Sterling explained, his eyes scanning the room. "They were the ghosts, the quiet professionals, the men they sent in when the situation was so hopeless, so utterly beyond repair, that there was no other option. They were the tip of the spear, the first in and the last out. Every man in that unit is a living legend in a world that doesn't even know their names. And this man," he said, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder, Sergeant Major Arthur Jensen, he wasn't just a nomad. He was the first man. He was their operational sergeant major for a decade. He was a man they sent to do the things that history will never record, and that nightmares are made of. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle like a physical shroud. The camera would pan across the faces. Chad's, a mask of disbelief and professional ruin. Leo's, completely broken, tears streaming down his cheeks unchecked. Sarah's, filled with awe and validation. The security guard's, a look of pure, unadulterated hero worship. Sterling's monologue reached its crescendo. "So you see, Mr. Collins," he said, his voice now dangerously soft, "you weren't just assessing a loan application. You were sitting in judgment of a national hero. You were weighing the life of a titan, and you found him wanting. It seems to me the only one in this room who is bankrupt is you." The silence that followed Sterling's revelation was absolute. It was a physical presence, heavy and profound, filling every corner of the vast banking hall. It was the silence of a truth, so immense it left no room for any other sound. Chad stood frozen behind his desk, his face the color of spoiled milk. His carefully constructed world of numbers, portfolios, and condescension had been utterly demolished. He was a king whose castle had been revealed to be made of sand, and the tide had just come in. Leo was no longer trying to hide his tears. They flowed freely, hot streams of shame, regret, and a bewildering new sense of pride that was so overwhelming it felt like grief. He looked at his father, at the man he had scorned and pitted, and saw a stranger, a giant. The entire narrative of his life, a story in which he was the aspiring hero and his father was a cautionary tale, had been a lie. He was a fool. He was a failure. Alistair Sterling broke the stillness. He looked at the trembling loan manager. "The loan for the car," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "is approved. The interest rate is 0%, in perpetuity." He then turned his gaze to the file on the desk. "In fact, this institution will be honored to provide Sergeant Major Jensen with any financial services he may require, for the remainder of his life at no cost. We will consider it a grotesquely inadequate repayment on a debt that can never be settled." He then reached into his suit jacket and produced a card, a sliver of polished black metal, a sterling centurion card, the bank's most exclusive invitation-only product, reserved for billionaires and heads of state. He walked over to Sarah, the young teller, who was still standing by her station, her face a portrait of awe. He handed the card to her. Her hand trembled as she took it. "Please see to it that Mr. Jensen's son gets the car he wants," Sterling instructed her, his voice gentle. "And open a private, unlimited line of credit for the sergeant major. Use this as the primary account. See to it personally." He then turned and faced Leo. The warmth was gone from his voice, replaced by a glacial cold. "You," he said, the word a shard of ice. "You are his son. You carry his name. You have his blood running in your veins. But it seems you have inherited none of his character. I sincerely hope you spend the rest of your days attempting to become a man worthy of calling him your father." The condemnation was absolute, a judgment for which there was no appeal. Sterling then turned back to Arthur. The two old soldiers looked at each other. In that shared gaze, decades of unspoken understanding passed between them. A lifetime of shared hardship, of loss, a silent code of honor that no one else in that room could ever comprehend. Sterling gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of profound respect. Soldier to soldier, brother to brother. The falling action was complete. The antagonists were vanquished, not by fists or fury, but by the crushing weight of the truth. Honor had been restored. The quiet man was quiet no more. Arthur Jensen sat for a moment in profound silence, the echoes of Alastair Sterling's words still hanging in the air like smoke. He had not sought this. He had not wanted this public vindication. The accolades, the medals, the stories, they were ghosts he had spent a lifetime trying to lay to rest. He looked at his son, Leo, whose face was buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. He looked at Chad, who seemed to have shrunk, diminished into a small, pathetic figure of a man. He looked at Sterling, his old friend, his brother-in-arms, and saw the fierce loyalty that had always defined him. With a quiet grace, Arthur pushed himself to his feet. The room watched his every move. He walked around the desk, his limp seeming more pronounced in the stillness. He did not take the black credit card from Sarah's trembling hand. He did not acknowledge the car or the approved loan. That was all part of a world he did not belong to. He walked to his son. Leo looked up, his eyes red and swollen, his face a mess of tears and shame. "Dad, I didn't know," he choked out, the words barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." Arthur looked down at his son, the boy he had taught to ride a bike, the young man he had watched walk away from him without a backward glance. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no triumph. There was only a vast, deep ocean of a father's sorrow. He slowly raised his hand and placed it on Leo's shoulder. He squeezed gently, a gesture of connection that said more than words ever could. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. Not yet. It was one of acknowledgement. "I am here. I see your pain." And then he turned and walked away. He nodded once to Alastair Sterling, a final, silent farewell. He walked out of the glass office, through the cavernous main hall where the staff and customers parted for him like the sea before Moses. He pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped back out into the afternoon sun, back into the anonymity of the city. He didn't look back. The camera would follow him, walking down the crowded sidewalk. He was just an old man with a slight limp and a threadbare coat, melting back into the fabric of the world that never knew his name. His honor had been publicly restored, but he carried it not as a crown, but as the same quiet, heavy weight he had always borne. He remained humble. He remained whole. The narrative shifts, the narrator's voice returning, warm and reflective. True wealth is not found in the vault of a bank or in the gleaming finish of a luxury car. It is forged in the crucible of character. It is measured in quiet acts of courage, in promises kept, in a loyalty that asks for nothing in return. Honor is not a medal you wear on your chest. It is a moral compass you carry in your soul. Arthur Jensen knew this. He had lived it, and in his quiet departure, he taught a lesson far more valuable than any amount of money. He taught what it means to be a man. What does true honor look like to you? Is it found in the grand gestures or in the quiet, unseen? acts of integrity? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. We believe everyone has a story of quiet strength, and we would be honored to hear yours. And for more stories that uplift the spirit and celebrate the hero within us all, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these important narratives with the world.